Welcome to the Inside Cabin Cruise blog and YouTube channel. I'm your host, Pete, the Inside Cabin, and I'll be taking you on a tour of the 2023 Grand World Voyage with Holland America's Zuiderdam. Let's get started. Here's a snapshot of what's going to happen on the cruise. We'll leave on January 3rd with about 1,500 guests, returning on May 12th to and from Fort Lauderdale. 30 countries, 61 different ports, 7 of those will be overnights with 60 sea days, and we're going to transit 34,353 nautical miles. Here's the overview map. Starts off in Fort Lauderdale through the Panama Canal, into the South Pacific, New Zealand, Southern Australia, across the Indian Ocean to Southern Africa, up the west coast of Africa, dip a little bit into the Mediterranean, and then hopscotch up the west coast of Europe into Scandinavia, over to Scotland, down to Ireland, and then back south through the Azores, ending up in Fort Lauderdale on May 12th. A lot of temperature changes on this cruise. This chart shows you the green band is roughly the comfort zone. The orange band is the high temperature for that day. The blue line is the low temperature for that day. So you can see we start off in the Caribbean, Central America. It's on the hot side and the highs, and then it sort of mild as we go across the South Pacific into Australia and New Zealand. And then once we get a little hot spell again in near the equator in Africa, it dips down into the chilly range into the 30s and 40s as we cruise up into Scandinavia. So it's going to be a lot of different temperatures on this Grand World Voyage. As you follow along on the World Cruise, you'll want to have a reference point where you can see where we've been and where we're going. On my blog, there's a lot of handy features you can do to keep track of where we've been and where we're going and what's going on that particular day. Looking on my blog, the first thing I want to point out is you can subscribe to it. That way you'll get an email notification whenever I post something new. The first thing you want to do every day when you check out the website is to look for the current posts on the World Cruise blog. You'll see that on the right-hand side, World Cruise blog. And then also down below, it gives you some thumbnails of the current blog posts. If you want to see previous cruise blogs, you can click on the previous cruise blogs button, and it'll pull up older cruises, and you can select any one of these buttons here, and it'll pull up the posts for that particular cruise. On the menus on the top, you can see the cruise blogs here. Drop down to the 2023 World Cruise and go to the World Cruise itinerary, and you click on that. It'll pull you up to another Google map of all the various ports. And then more interesting, of course, is a table where you can see all the scheduled ports, the time of arrival. I'll have links to the menus once we have those, the daily programs, and also who is the entertainer that day. So you can scroll down here and see where we've been and where we're going. And also I'll link to each blog post from the port here. Back to the cruise blog menu, you go down to the next one, which is the Grand World Voyage map. And this map here will show you all the posts that I anticipate doing for the whole World Cruise. If you click on any one of these little dots, you'll see where we are. That's in that sea on a particular date. Click on one where we're in port. It'll show you at sea there, but down here in Sydney, click on that, and it'll show you we're in Sydney, New South Wales, overnight to 5 p.m. So you can look on this map and click on a point and see when we're going to be in that particular part of the world. Moving on down the other parts of the menu, you'll see the activities. One of the nice things about a world cruise is there's a lot of different kind of theme nights and activities. This page here will list all the various activities. You can download a copy in an Excel format or a PDF copy of the entire activity spreadsheet. And then here's a table for your reference. You can see on January 6th, of course, is the captain's welcome reception. That's a dressy night. And the venue will probably be in the world stage, but it's not yet been published. And then so on and so forth. As the cruise progresses, you'll find things like the Rotterdam Ball, which is the first formal night. And they're going back to formal nights on this cruise where tuxedos or dark suits are required. 6 of those this cruise. And then so on and so forth. You'll see various theme nights, Glamp Out Night, Derby Night, Let Them Eat Cake, Super Bowl Sunday, which is actually Monday where we'll be, a night of music, a night in Hollywood, a barn dance. So a lot of fun parties, a lot of chance to wear costumes and dress up and just have a great time interacting with your other world cruisers. Continuing on the menus for the 2023, you'll see the 2023 World Cruise reference. You click on this and you'll see links to all the handouts we've gotten before the cruise and handouts that we have gotten during the cruise as we progress. I'll post all those here. A few other things on the home page is if you're ever interested in doing a world cruise, there's some frequently asked questions, links to all my previous blog posts for various ports. We've been planning this cruise for over 2 years, and so about every 2 weeks, we've been talking about a different set of ports. And so you can click through here, and you can see links to all the YouTube videos for the various ports that we've talked about, and you can get insight into what we're doing, and also it could help you for your own planning when you're going to go visit one of these ports on your own cruise. And finally, there's a section with some how much the world cruise will cost and packing tips, along with some of my things I shop for when I go on a world cruise. So this blog is a great resource for not only when you're following my particular post, but also there's a lot of other bloggers. There's probably 1,300 people blogging. If you scroll down a little bit further, you'll see links to the other World Cruise blogs. And here you'll see links to the other 13, I think at the time, World Cruise blogs here. And it's always fun to check out these to see what else people are doing. Because everyone has a different perspective on the cruise and what they're looking at. And it's always fun to follow the cruise through different sets of eyes. Here is Google Earth Pro with our route overlaid with the various ports. And I'll take a little bit of time here to spin the globe, because it's always interesting to see this perspective on a globe where you don't have the distortions of a flat map. So again, we start off in Fort Lauderdale, through the Caribbean, through the Panama Canal, across the very massive now Pacific Ocean. You're going to see the breadth of this down to Tonga, New Zealand, and then to South Australia, across the Indian Ocean, to South Africa, up the west coast of Africa, to Malaga, through the Straits of Gibraltar, then up the west coast of Spain, Portugal, into Amsterdam, up to Scandinavia, across to Scotland, Ireland, back to the Azores, and then across to Fort Lauderdale, where we started on May 12th. So let's look at each one of these ports quickly. Starting off in Terminal 26, your favorite spot for Holland America. First port is Falmouth, Jamaica. There's a tourist enclave here, and there's some Jamaican bobsleds you can do here, or a little bit river rafting, or some Jamaican beef pies. Next up is Puerto Limon, Costa Rica. Again, we tie up here in the town, and there's a lot of eco tours here, zip lining and river rafting. Next is Panama Canal. And for the first time in my experience, we'll actually we'll not anchor. We will tie up at a pier at the same spot, but you don't have to take the tender boats in, which makes this port a lot more pleasant. Nuku Hiva is our first port in the South Pacific. They typically have one tour here into the interior, And so we'll probably just walk along the crescent-shaped bay here to spend our time. Papeete is next. There is where we'll tie up, right in the big part of the city. And it's a fun town just to walk around, and there's a lot of tours you can go on that'll circle the island, and you can see a lot of very beautiful scenery. The next day, of course, we'll be in Moorea, and there will anchor right about there, and the tender pier is right about there. A lot of beach activities in this port. And we'll be there on a Sunday, so there'll be less things open than there might otherwise be. Next up is Raiatea. We had to skip Bora Bora due to the prohibition on ship sizes, but we'll be overnight in Raiatea. And Raiatea is there we'll tie up. And a wonderful place for some amazing snorkeling tours that take place generally around the northern island there. Next up is Tonga. Tonga is suffered underwater volcano about 50 miles away earlier this year, and they're still recovering from a lot of the damage of the tsunami and the fallout of the ash. So we're not quite sure what we're going to see, but it'll be interesting. It'll be good to get some tourism back into that island because it's very, very pretty. Moving on down to Auckland. Again, a very beautiful place, downtown location. A lot going on here. Maritime Museum, War Memorial Museum. You can walk around the Sky Tower, go over to Devonport here, over to Waikiki Island. A lot of wineries, lots going on in Auckland. Next is Tauranga. Again, there's a tie-up. You can hike up this mountain very close to where the ship docks, or you can take a shuttle bus into the main city here. Gisborne is next up. It'll be a tender port, and this is a launching spot for a lot of wine tours, which is what we're going to do, a wine tour in this port. Wellington, this will be the first time I've been to Wellington. This is the capital of New Zealand. We'll tie up there, and there'll be a shuttle bus running to downtown, but there's a lot of very interesting things to see here, a lot of great museums, a lot of great restaurants. It's the capital of New Zealand, so you have all the Capitol buildings here, and it's just going to be a wonderful place to visit. Next up on Sydney, we're here overnight, but it looks like we're going to be at the White Bay Cruise Terminal, as opposed to the Rocks, which is a lot more convenient when you're over here, because you do have to take a shuttle bus or Uber over to generally Darling Harbor over here. But again, Sydney, beautiful city, lots going on. Sydney Opera House will be having Don Quixote that evening when we're there, and so people can take that in if you want to see the Sydney Opera House. And of course, there's all the beautiful beaches and a lot to do in Sydney. Next up is Port Arthur, where the old penal colony was, and so we'll tender in from there, and the tours are included as part of your port charges. And so you spend most of the time here just sort of wandering around this historical site here at Port Arthur. There's a small town a little bit further away, but with some wild animals and hunting and stuff, but most people have spent their time just around the port. That evening, we'd go on to Hobart, spend the night, and it's a nice little town, a lot of touristy stuff, some good yarn shops in here for the yarn hunters, and you can go down to a few other spots. There's a nice lookout, one of the mountain peaks here that's sometimes tricky with the weather, but Hobart will be overnight, a chance to sample some of the local restaurants. Adelaide is next in South Australia. We're about 10 miles out of town. Nice train will take you to the center of the city. A lot going on here. It's a very busy city. A lot of beautiful museums, a lot of nice things to do, a lot of shops, pedestrian malls. It's a fun place to do. And there's some outlying wine tours as well as some wildlife parks you can go visit. Next day we'll be in Kangaroo Island on Penishaw. We'll tender in from there, and they'll go to a tour to see some of the seals on the beach down here, and we're going to go over to Flanders National Park. We're going to rent a car and drive pretty far, about 70 miles or so, across the island to see the Admiral's Arch and some of the other touristy sites over there. Next up is Fremantle, a few days away. Tie up here. It is, of course, a beautiful port visit, Fremantle by itself. And it, of course, is the gateway to Perth. And Perth has a beautiful city, a lot going on. And there's a Swan Valley up here with a lot of wineries that people will enjoy as well. After we leave Fremantle, we got 6 days at sea before we head to Port Louis in the Indian Ocean. Here is a pretty big city, and there's a lot going on. A lot of museums, sometimes nicer hotels or restaurants, and so it'll be an interesting port. Some good museums and some interesting cultural events. After Port Louis, we head off to La Possession Reunion Island. We'll tie up here in a sort of a container port town of La Possession, and the big city, of course, is Saint Denis, which is about 10-15 miles away. And it's a really working city. There's not a lot of touristy stuff there. It's just a lot of people doing stuff, and there's a large market and a few other places there, but it's not as touristy as I would have thought. So we're going to take a Hal tour off to these cirques, these large bowls. You can see them here in the island, and there's a lot of interesting scenery and small villages out there. After Reunion Island, we head to Madagascar, and the highlight here is going to be lemurs. We missed this port on our last cruise, and so we're looking forward to the opportunity to see lemurs here. And then finally on to the mainland of Africa, Maputo. Maputo is the port that is mainly used as a jumping off spot for a lot of safaris. And you'll see a lot of people heading off to the Jock Safari Lodge, which is a place that Hal goes to every world cruise that hits Africa. And there's a bunch of other safari lodges in the general area here. So there'll be a lot of people going on a Hal tour, and a lot of people going on independent safaris, leaving from Maputo and going off into this area here, which is a Kruger National Park. Next up is Durban, a big city here, and you can walk to the main part of town. There's some malls, museums. Also, it's a big jumping off spot for day tours, day safaris to local safari parks. Next up is East London, and this spot here is a smaller town. Not a whole lot going on in the city, but it's another spot you can go off to safari parks that are fairly close to the town and see some animals in the wild. Then we're off to Port Elizabeth, or PE, and this town was recently renamed Klikbeha. And I'm pronouncing it probably incorrectly, but the best I can do is it's a Klikbeha. And the interesting new pronunciation for that city. So they're still calling it Port Elizabeth on the Hal tour brochure. So we'll call it PE, or Port Elizabeth. There is not a lot going on here. Again, it's a jumping off spot for a lot of other tours. There's a Duncan Heritage Trail, which is about 50 cultural sites. You can download the map for that and then walk around there. Then there's Cape Town is up next. Cape Town, of course, a lot going on here. We'll stay close to the V&A waterfront, which is right up there. Very walkable to that part. It's maybe a mile or so, so it's not totally walkable. And there's Table Mountain, Boulder Beach, where you can see a lot of great penguins. Then there's Cape Hope, and a really wonderful ho-ho system here in Cape Town. After that, we're into Lüderitz, Namibia, and here we will see there's ghost towns off the road, some diamond mines, old diamond mines, so there's sort of deserty kind of area there. So it's not a whole lot of town, but there's a few tours, deserty kind of tours that are outside the town. Next up is Wallis Bay. Here is sort of a German heritage. There's a town there called Swakopmund, which is maybe 20 miles north or so of the Wallis Bay, which is more touristy and more interesting to see Then there's other tours south, one to Sandwich Harbor, where you can see some pretty scenery that runs along the coast. Wallace Bay is also where you'll find Dune 7, one of the larger dunes around, and people have visited that on various forms of transportation, and they've all come back with rave reviews. Luanda, Angola is our next stop, and this town here is sort of not a lot going on. There's a couple of touristy sites, a fort you can take a tour to. Some people have actually walked there. It's a couple miles down the waterfront, but most people will take an organized tour. They're right outside a gate. This is a container ship kind of a gate. There is a little like a craft market, artist market right outside there. You can maybe pick up some paintings. Then is the equator at the prime meridian, and we'll typically drive by here pretty close and become emerald shellbacks, or I guess some people call it a diamond shellback, but it's a different kind of a shellback than most people will have experienced, and that'll be a fun little ceremony when we cross, and then we'll have the Royal Neptune ceremony probably the next day. Takoradi, Ghana is next, and that is a place where you can see cocoa farmers and a few volunteer opportunities. Not a whole lot of tours there in the traditional sense. Then we have Ivory Coast, Abidjan. Again, not a lot of touristy infrastructure here. Botanical gardens and a cocoa farm. Banjul, the Gambia, is our next stop, and I plan to do what I did here in 2018, which is go on to a home cooking tour where you go to someone's house and help them prepare dinner. We had a great time doing that, and you can check out my video on YouTube and see that experience. Senegal is next, and the highlight of this spot is Gorée Island, which was infamous for its role in the slave trade back in the day in the 1800s or so. A lot of slaves was their final stop in Africa before heading off to the United States or the Indies or the Caribbean or wherever they were going to. But sort of a sobering tour to go see Gorée Island in Senegal. After that is Santa Cruz, Tenerife, and this is a very touristy spot. So we will be there on Easter week, so I'll be there for spring break, and this is a very popular tourist spot for Europeans. So this should be thousands and thousands of people there. This is one spot where the cruise ships will not actually overwhelm a lot of the port people. The next day we'll be in Arrecife, another Canary Island, and sort of the highlight tour here is a camel ride, an opportunity to ride a camel. So it's a little smaller than the other port in the Canary Islands, but there's a chance to ride a camel if that's something that you'd find interesting. Then we're off to Morocco for 3 ports, and the first up is Agadir, and that's in the southern part of Morocco. There's a market there and a few other old ruins, and then we're off to Casablanca, which is a bigger city, and they have a lot of tourist sites in the city. There's Rick's Cafe, which is sort of a replica of the cafe that was made famous in the movie Casablanca, although people say it really had nothing to do with the movie, but the guy's sort of working off the name to try to sell stuff, but it may be want to stop by just so you can see you've been there. And then it's also a launching off spot to the city of Marrakesh, where you can take a tour there. About a 3-hour drive there, though. Tangiers is the next spot in Morocco, and there's a tea and bread experience that Hal offers. And it's another town you can explore the history and culture of this part of the world. Then you're off to Malaga in Spain, and we'll be close to the Cordoba the Roman ruins are is town of Alhambra. So Malaga is a big city in its own right. There's stuff going on there, big city stuff, but then there's the two outlying towns, Cordova and Alhambra, which have their own little tourist infrastructures. Then we have Cadiz, which is very, very touristy. We'll be there Easter Sunday, so it's going to be jam-packed. It's also listed as the spot for Seville. So some people have been to Cadiz before, may want to go to Seville. It's probably 35, 40 miles away. Lisbon is next up, and there is some wine tours there and a sort of an interesting, like a castle kind of a structure called Sintra that's up in the hills outside the city. Next is El Coruna, well known for its lighthouse. So people want to tour the lighthouse there in El Coruna, or A Coruna. Brest is our first stop in the northern part of Europe, in France. This is a very tourist town. There's a lot of crepe activity here. In fact, we're going to take a crepe class. You can take a shuttle bus to sort of the downtown pedestrian mall and spend your day walking around. Very nice city. After that, we're off to Portland, England, which is the port town next to the more popular tourist spot of Weymouth, which is here. Weymouth has what's called a Helter Skelter. You may remember that from a Beatles song. It's an old children's ride. There's one of those on the beach, and it's also the jumping off point for Stonehenge, which is an hour and a half or so away. So if you want to go to Stonehenge, this is your chance from Portland. Then we go back across the English Channel to Havre. Here you can go to see Paris. Hal runs a tour to Paris, or what we're going to do is go to Mont Saint-Michel, which is a couple hours away, and it's the old, very picturesque abbey that was said to inspire potentially Disneyland. So we're going to take that as our tour there. Then we're off to Zeebrugge, which is the jumping off point for a town of Bruges, which is like an hour away, and it's really the typical European town. If Disneyland built a European town, it'd look like Bruges. So there's a lot going on there. It's very small, very quaint, very pretty, and so most everyone's going to spend the day heading off to Bruges. Then we're off to Amsterdam, and here's a lot going on. We'll be here overnight. There's a flower festival, which only happens in the April time frame, so we're going to be there at the right time. So everyone's going to go see tulips in Amsterdam, and then that evening we expect to be part of the 150th anniversary of Holland America Line, which will be taking place in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, and the cruise ship MS Rotterdam will be there as well. So we're not sure exactly of the details, but we are expecting a huge event. And then also Amsterdam's got canals, tours, Anne Frank Museum, a lot going on in Amsterdam. Then we're off to Copenhagen in Denmark, a modern city, a lot going on, a lot of interesting culture as you move into Scandinavia. And the weather will get cooler here now. As you move up north, we'll be getting down into the 40s into the daytime, and a lot of things will be closed because the tourist season doesn't really start in this part of the world until probably May 1st, or really the middle of May towards June. Then we're off to Oslo, and again, very nice city, very walkable from where we'll be tied up, but a lot of things will be closed because of the being there in April. So it'll be cool and not quite as crowded, which is good and bad, because some things that will be closed that otherwise would have been open. Then we're going to Norway. Again, small town, a lot of scenery, a lot of little quaint shops. And again, some things will be closed because of the off-season time of our visit. Haugesund is next. There's not a lot going on here. It's a small little town. It's fun to walk around, spend the day. There's a few outline tours you can take to some old parts that replica kind of little cities and seeing Norsemen and things like that. But we'll probably just hang around town. Eidfjord, again, is way back down the fjords, and this is a very pretty sort of drive-in, drive-out. Not much going on in the city itself. You can leave on a tour here and go see some waterfalls. And our final stop in Norway is Bergen. This is a very, very nice spot in June or July, but we'll be here in April, and it's going to be cold, and not as much stuff will be open, so it'll be a different kind of an experience. Then we're off to United Kingdom and Scotland, and Portree. Isle of Skye is our first stop here, and we'll go see, there's castles in this area, a lot of castles, and a lot of distilleries for Scotch whiskey. So that's sort of the highlights of this port, and also our next port, Oban, a tender port. And it's a very small town, a few walkable attractions, castles, again, more distilleries that you can see right there in the main town. Dunleary is our next stop, which is the jumping off spot for Dublin. Big cruise ships are not allowed as frequently in Dublin as it used to be, so they send the cruise ships to Dunleary, which makes it also a tender port, because you have to tender in from out here, and then you tie up, the tenders tie up here, then you can take a train about 8 miles into Dublin, and of course then you see all the Dublin sites, Book of Kells, Guinness Museum, and a lot of other interesting shows and shops in Dublin. And then our last stop in Ireland is Cove, famous for its role, not really a role, but it was the last stop of the Titanic and its deadly last trip. So it's a lot of passengers got on here on the last stop, and there's a Titanic museum and a lot of things going on here Titanic wise. Also, this is a jumping off spot for Cork and the Blarney Stone. If you want to kiss the Blarney Stone, this is your chance from Cove. And then our last two stops are in the Azores. Again, these are touristy spots. Expect a lot of crowds as we're getting a little bit warmer now as we're into the first week of May. And so it'll be more touristy stuff in both of these ports in the Azores. And then after that, we are off to another 6 days at sea before we head back to Terminal 26. And the cruise will be over at 7 a.m. on May 12th. So it's going to be a great 128 days. It starts here in about 48 hours. I'm looking forward to that. And I'm getting on an airplane in about 12 hours from here and heading off to Fort Lauderdale. So more to come on this wonderful cruise. So that concludes the overview of the 60-some ports that we're going to go see. And then in about 12 hours, I'll be on a plane heading off to the East Coast to spend a few days in Fort Lauderdale before joining Desire Dam on the morning of January 3rd. And then we head off on our wonderful adventure, the first grand world voyage in almost 3 years for Holland America. And we're looking forward to it. It's going to be a great trip.